Chris was an early pioneer, was around for the beginning of the Epson QX10. He used to run at trade shows around the corner from Steve Jobs and Wozniak. Anyway, that's your story, you can tell it. Let me get out of the way. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everybody. Glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. It's good to be alive, I'll tell you. I say that because a lot of people that I worked with and a lot of people that are in this story passed away over the last 3 years. And I'm glad that I haven't yet. And I thought it was appropriate that I should stand up and still tell some of the stories that I have to pass on about what has happened in the world. So the rise of the machines, right out of the Terminator movie, of course we mean here business PCs. And the side name to it is Wipeout on the Third Wave. And Wipeout on the Third Wave, did any of you ever read the book by Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave? It was a book about futurism back in the 80s. And about the thunderous approach of the third wave of information technology. And somebody dreamed up a saying, a motto for our company, that we were working the kernel of the third wave on a silicon surfboard. So I thought that Wipeout on the Third Wave was also an appropriate title for this presentation. But I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm going to see if we can get on with it and get moving forward. That's not working, so I'll do it this way. This isn't working either. Okay, what we're going to cover, history of technology from the Big Bang to the present, and the most important discovery ever, from my perspective. And that is the things that let me design a computer system. And we're going to talk about the birth of the business PC. The QX10 played a role in that, and nobody's ever heard of it. And perhaps that's right, but we'll talk about it. The last we're going to talk about is something called Architectural Stabilization, which was a tool that I dreamed up and created back when I was designing the QX10 and the volatile system that went on it to describe how technologies evolve. And we're going to take a look at that. I don't know if any of you have ever read anything by Kurt Vonnegut. And Ice 9 in A Sea of Marketing Possibilities. Ice 9 was a mythological substance which, if you put it in water, instantly froze the water because it dropped the freezing temperature of water. And that's what everybody in marketing is always looking for. You're always looking for Ice 9. In this business, we might have called it VCF. If you take a look at the killer app that ran on the Apple II that made Apple into something, it was really important to see it coming that way. And the other question that comes up is, why would anybody want a computer on their desk? That was a statement that was made to me by a banker back in probably 1976, early on. When we went in, we had orders for computers, and we were trying to get money to build the computers, and the banker looked at us like we were Martians and said, why would anybody want a computer on their desk? And, we didn't have an answer for it back then. We didn't know exactly why. We knew people would, that was really clear, but we didn't know why. Anyway, that's part of what we're going to talk about. And hopefully this will probably try to figure out why that isn't working. A bit of a bio. I'll start off with the bio by pointing at this picture on the right-hand side. That was the first computer I ever used. That was called Spider, and it was made by Roger Amidon, my business partner for many years. And Spider was a radio telephone controller and store and forward mechanism that Roger built using a Skelby 4004 and lots of alligator clips and the three components that he had put together. And one day his cat walked on it, it fell off the top of the shelf, rolled down across and onto the floor, and it kept working. So he left it that way for about 2 years. And that was the first computer I ever used in my life. I sat down at his radio teletype system and he was telling me all this and I set it up to run it. I've been a ham radio operator since 1960. When I was 11, I went in and took the federal exams for Morse code and all that. So I've been involved in technology all of my life, but I make it clear that I am not an engineer. And I have never been an engineer. I am an appliance operator, and I'm proud of that. An appliance operator is basically somebody who doesn't care how the box works on the inside. I just want to know how to work it on the outside. And that really is the emergence of the appliance computer when you relate that to the computer industry. That all of you sitting in this audience, with the possible exception of my wife, are computer hobbyists at some level or another who have some interest in technology for technology's sake. You are, however, in the minority on this planet. You are not the majority of the population. And back in the early days, there were a couple of people who knew that the appliance computer was coming. The two people I know who knew were myself and Steve Jobs. I don't know, I can't speak for anybody else, but I can sure speak for the two of us. We were really on it. In any event, I went to Rutgers. I studied business systems in Denmark, and I returned from Denmark in 1975 just as the Altair was being announced in Popular Electronics magazine. I went to visit a friend of mine, and he said, oh, here's the new copy of PE that just came out. And I looked at it, and it was mind blown on the spot. I can say with a straight face that I knew all of this was going to happen that day. I just had this vision in my head that the world was going to be covered, and there was, in fact, going to be a computer on every desk in the world. And that was clear to me the first day I ever heard about them in my friend's house. Anyway, we went off and started a company called Technical Design Labs, in which I was partners with Roger and Carl, a fellow named Neil Colvin. Neil Colvin, you would probably know best from the Phoenix BIOS. You know, when your IBM machines would say the Phoenix BIOS at the start, well, Neil wrote the Phoenix BIOS, and the Phoenix BIOS was written rising from the ashes of TDL. When it closed down, Neil went off and took the software and did this, and I'm supposed to walk back more into the center so I stay on camera. And we had developed a computer system called the General at Technical Design Labs. The General was a Z80 256K box with a couple of floppy drives on it and a nice big 80-character monitor. And we had orders for millions of dollars worth of those darn things, and we couldn't get 2 cents to build them. Raising money at the time was very, very difficult, so that company went away before it really got a good chance to start. I went from there out to California, and I went to work for Epson. At that point in time, I was the first American, as far as I know, employee at Epson. There was one secretary in the place who had been there before me, but everybody else was Japanese. So I was there very, very early on. I introduced and product spec'd out the MX80 printer, which changed the whole world of printers. If you know the history of that, well, there's a lot of history to it, but I won't go into it. I don't think I have enough time tonight, but I introduced the QX10 computer that Epson did, and then Rising Star, my own company, was a spin-off from Epson. The reason for the spin-off was kind of interesting, and that was that there was no way for me to share as an employee in anything that I created for Epson. I was getting $30,000, $40,000 a year or something like that, and there was no good way for them to share. If I was going to found a company and build all this stuff, to be like the other guys who are in the business, to do that, they said, what we do is we can't give you part of Epson. What we can do is we'll start another company, and you will own the company you start. So they started a company called Rising Star, which became the development arm for Epson for a good long time. I went on from that. After all this went down, I went on for a long time and retired as an IT director here. Just after 15 years in IT, I retired just at the end of December, and so got back to that. Whoa, that's a bit of a bio. The other side of this bio, this page of it shows the first ad that I ever did for TDL, and it was an ad for the first Z80 processor board that was plugging into an S100 bus. And that was the first product that we made. I may not have been an engineer, but my job at the company was, for example, I wrote the manual for the macro assembler, I wrote the manual for the basic interpreter, and edited it. I laid out PC boards, I did everything that could be done, but there were other guys who were really good digital designers and programmers. Neil was from MIT, good friend of Bill Gates, so there was no reason to do that. A little side story for TDL that's just an interesting anecdote to pass on is that we were all Z80 and all of our code was Z80, and we had a really nice Z80 basic that was running, and it was so popular that Tandy came to us and literally came to us in my mother's living room in New Jersey and offered us a deal to put our basic on this little computer they were going to make that turned into the TRS-80. The problem was that two of my partners there said, no, we don't want your cash one-time payment, we'll take the deal, but we got to have a royalty for everyone we sell. Tandy said, thank you very much, and went to Microsoft. And Microsoft Basic, of course, went on to the TRS-80. And all I can say is I don't know what the outcome of that would have been if we'd say yes to the deal, but it's pretty sure that the history of all this would be different than it was. It turned out to be positive. So let's see what we can move on to. Roots of this presentation. I've been writing a book for the last year about history of technology. I'm calling it History of Technology, Future of Everything. That's kind of what I've been working on. And in doing that, in working through very old technologies that have evolved, I kept running back end into the computer industry. And I don't mind telling you, my company, Rising Star, went out of business in 1986, something like that. And I was unable to even think about that for years. It was like losing a child. It was a very traumatic PTSD incident for me, so I really wasn't able to think about it or pursue it. So it's only been in this last time that I was running into in the book saying, you know, all this stuff happened in the computer business that I was part of, and the technologies leading into it, so I kind of need to talk about it. But the problem is history is tough when you're part of the history. It's, you know, you would always stand up and say, I did this and I did that. You don't do history like that. When I'm writing history of technology, it's always, you know, Samuel Morse, the inventor of Morse code, which he didn't, by the way.
Albert Vail.
Wow, somebody knows that.
And his assistant, Master Michael Baxter.
Wow, I am impressed. There's two people.
KX60W.
NW6B. Well, I would say to you as a ham, by the way, that a lot of the guys, most of the people I knew in this business, in the computer business in the early days of ham radio operators, there was a ton of ham radio people involved in putting this all together.
Still is the director of this place, Steve at W0GT.
Cool. Right, excellent. Thank you for that information. Appreciate it.
Thank you for this presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome. Wait till I get into it and you see if you really think that one's over. That's what we're doing here. So anyway, there were a lot of things to talk about, and part of doing history when you're in the history is complicated, and that is that I've discovered that memory is very fleeting. I would love to stand up here and tell you that I remember everything in detail and I've got it right, but I'll pass on a bit of an anecdote that's a negative thing in a sense. That showed it was one of the things that motivated me to start doing this work. Frank Caparello, the name I mentioned on the previous slide, was one of the fellows I worked with at Rising Star. He was one of the guys, a very, very excellent developer, a very dear friend of mine. And he died a couple of years ago at pancreatic cancer, and I was with him about a week before he passed away. And he said, Chris, in all the years I knew you, and Frank was WC2F, by the way, was his call. In all the years I knew you, there was one thing that really bothered me. He said there was this meeting we had with Zilog once, where they put $2.2 million on the table and offered us that to design a chip for them. And you said, this is BS, and stood up and slammed the offer down on the table and walked out. And I said, well, I'm sitting with Frank and he's passing on, and going, wow, that's really something. And the problem was, I didn't remember it at all. I had absolutely zero recollection of it happening. And it took me a couple of weeks to start putting it together in my head to try and pull the memories out and realizing what an incredible PTSD incident it was. As a matter of record, what I found out at that meeting was that we were never going to have a Zilog product that was going to run our software the way it needed to run to let us go to a desktop, and that we were dead. And that all the money that we spent, the tens of millions of dollars that we put into developing the software, had all just been flushed down the tubes. And was never going to get it because we weren't going to be able to migrate. We had to migrate onto a different processor. We couldn't stay with Zilog. And that was really a big negative for us. So it turned into an interesting thing. But that concept of memory being fleeting was an important part of it. Because at some point in time, you have to dig through these things and dig them up. The other thing is, and this is the big question, does it matter? I think the QX10 was a really important machine. I think the work we did there was important and influential, and there are no QX10s in this museum. You're not going to find them anywhere. You don't see them around. It was forgotten. It kind of got wiped out of the record. But what's really important about it is that the predictive model that was used to design our software and to design the system actually gave me a rubric, a measuring stick, with which to see how technology evolved in general. That's part of the development project that we'll talk about. And that rubric, that mental technique that came out of it is actually worthwhile. And even today, I've been using it for the last 30 years, and guess what? It works. And for the first time ever, I'm going to pass it on to people. This I haven't talked about with anybody, even the people who are working closest with inside Rising Star. Never heard some of what I'm going to tell you today. You're the very first group of people who are going to hear this stuff. So, for what that's worth. Epsom salts. Question? Say again, please. No. I was asked if it was tied to Plato. No, it's not tied to Plato. Anyway, Epson was so unknown when I first started working for Epson that I'd carry a printer into a dealer and they'd say, Epsom salts? What the heck has that got to do with computers? Yeah, who's that guy in the picture? That's how we started out. But a year and a half later, Business Week is writing this article, which is basically all about how Japan is destroying the American printer market, is being torn apart. The worldwide printer market is being torn apart by the Japanese. And one of the guys who was interviewing us actually said, "Are you the general in charge of the Japanese invasion?" I said no, because I didn't want to put that in the press. But if you ever go back and dig up this article, it actually goes into this is happening and they're invading and they're assaulting this and it's a battle and the wars are being fought. And so it was interesting times. But one interesting piece of that the quote that they gave me said the key technology is mass production. The source of that was really, if you remember that thing I talked about, the general computer that we couldn't get to build. I knew that in order to make printers reliable, in order to make computers, you had to have lots and lots of capital and lots of manufacturing capacity. And I had very high confidence in Epson's ability to deliver that. And it was key. And I knew that a lot of the other companies, the Kremenkos and the people who were competing against the American market, had nothing. They couldn't compete against these larger companies that were coming in. And I was in a position to control it. I won a marketing award for it. And as I mentioned, we introduced the MX-80. And sold hundreds of thousands of them really quickly. And it was very successful, and it made Epson a success in the marketplace. By the time we got to 1981, Epson was everywhere. We were in every ad, we were in every computer store. And this, the cutting edge of technology, this was the first use of the cutting edge, which is the phrase everybody knows now. It was actually done as a t-shirt for Epson. And we couldn't afford to pay like a royalty to John Belushi's family. He was still alive when we started it, and then he died while we were starting to use it. He a drug overdose, and of course the Japanese, the idea that there was a drug overdose was like, no, drugs, you don't do anything with that in Japan, so we couldn't use it. So we used it in our cell. We went out and said the cutting edge, Epson, the cutting edge of technology, and used it, and it went viral, spread around the world. But it was part of the excitement of what it was like. And I mentioned here the NCC in 1981. One day at the trade show, as the trade show was opening up, they put out broadsheets. They put out little newspapers at the trade show every day. And the newspaper came out one day, and it basically said Centronics is in deep trouble, and Centronics is maybe going out of the business, and they've lost all this business. There's also a tradition when you work with the Japanese, if you're visiting the Japanese, you take them a gift and they bring you a gift. There's always an exchange of gifts. So at the party, after the first day of the trade show, I met with the owners of Seiko Epson. They're up there and they take a copy of the newspaper and I said, here's my present to you, the head of the king on a pike. Meaning that Centronics had just been beaten really badly. And I knew that Centronics had pissed Epson off and refused to work with them. Epson wanted to come into America via Centronics and make deals with Centronics, and Centronics rebuffed them. So I went up to the guys and said, here's this. They came back to me a couple of days later and said, basically, what do you want? Any product you want. If we can make a product, we will build it. We will try. They gave me the keys to the kingdom. They would build anything I wanted to build. And so what did I know about? I knew about the general machine we designed a couple years earlier and where that was heading with things. So that was the first basis of where the QX10 came from. Rising Star was kind of an interesting place. Had wonderful people working there. We ended up, I guess when we closed down, we had 70 or 80 employees total. About half of those were programmers and developers, early first grade. The project started out as a research project. Since my first title at Epson Mr. Tsuboda, who was the president, said, what do you want your title to be? And I said, I want to be manager of market research and development, because before I can do anything, I need to know what it is we're going to make. So I'm doing market research and development. So you put that on my card. Later on, I became the sales and marketing manager. But I started off saying it was research and development because you had to know, and I've always been a believer in doing that sort of thing. So I did a research project. I made a presentation in Japan, on the Japan side, to show them what we designed. They sent engineers over to Princeton, New Jersey. We went to the Palmer Inn for a week, and there were 3 guys from Japan and 4 of us from America who met for 7 days and hashed out the hardware that was going to be the QX10, the basic look of what the software was going to look like. And the real question is, what was in that presentation? That gets down to the important thing. I also mentioned these Byte articles, which you can find in Byte magazine in 1982, when I revealed the whole thing of what the product was supposed to do. Anyway, starting with a research project with a couple of givens, the computer would end up as a commodity. As I said, we were working on the idea, I was working on the idea that we were going to make an appliance computer here. I'm an appliance operator. I wanted to make a computer that everybody would use. And one of the things that I often heard was that computers could be used for anything. Well, this made a problem for marketing, and it made a problem when you're talking to finance people, because they'd say, well, what are you going to do with it? Anything. Be specific. Name one thing. What do you do with it? You had to be able to come back with answers to that, and answers that made sense. So why would it be a commodity? What would it be used for? What are the barriers to broad acceptance? I had to research those points, and did so with surveys. I was a big believer in surveying things and getting feedback from the people who were going to be using something. Some products become commodities. That was a given in this. A commodity I'm defining here, this is not like an economics definition from an economics course. This is a definition from the world of life, that some products become so basic in our society that the civilization is quite literally built upon them. Things like automobiles and televisions are commodities in the sense that can't. Well, I need an hour to talk about that one. So, what's that? Another example of a classic product that does this. Yes, and we'll get into that, and that's part of what was fun. I think it's. What I discovered was that technical products evolve in a pattern. It was the first thing I noticed. I did this project, this research, and went back into the history of technical products to look and see how they had evolved. And volume reduces prices, engineers come in, and some products make it to the end of this list. If a product becomes easy enough to use, that was what was discovered. That in terms of basic requirements, ease of use was going to be the key to opening up the marketplace. And at different stages of product evolution, different kinds of people use the product. The technical specialists, engineers, and innovators, these are the people who are reading Byte magazine. You folks are a class of people, but you, in general, with products, will tolerate more difficulty because you're interested in the product to a degree for its own sake. You will tolerate more difficulty in acquiring it or using it and making it part of your life because that's what you do for fun. As you go up the scale to consumers at the other end of it, the far end of it, they will tolerate nothing. It's got to work every time. We used to joke that there was something called spill spec instead of mill spec. And spill spec meant that you could pour a cup of coffee over the keyboard, leave it over the 4th of July weekend, and come back on Monday, and it would work. That's the expectation that people have of consumer products. If you plug a light into the wall and it doesn't work, you stand there like, what? What's doing this? Why would it not work? You expect consumer products to expect it to work first time, every time. And that is a pretty different consideration. And, of course, not all products are equally important. There are fads, there are things that are just hobbies, and there are things that are foundations. Foundation products are what we're looking at. There was this belief, I still had the belief at that time, that computers were so basic to people that they were going to be everywhere. That's part of that initial insight that I had way back in New Jersey back in the day. An interesting thing about foundations, as I mentioned, such inventions reinvent the user. What I mean by this, and the best example I think is electricity, that I give the example of saying if you or I go out into the woods without electricity, and we have no electricity out there, well, we didn't really go out into the woods without electricity because it's inside us. It's in our heads, it's part of who we are, it's part of how we think. If civilization went into the basket tomorrow, we would all be going around, gosh, I got to charge my phone. We'd be starting to reinvent electricity right away because we know it's a part of us. It's integrated into our culture, into our beings. That is what happens with foundation products. They become so much a part of who we are that the whole civilization is literally built around them. And there are many examples of that sort of thing. Important consideration. The medium is the message. Reinvented user becomes a new platform on which the culture arises. And that is an important consideration. That's what McLuhan meant in the medium is the message. He meant that the medium, the thing you're using, the tool, becomes a part of you. It isn't out there anymore. It's actually an integrated thing into your beingness. An important consideration. In product evolution, there is an end stage. It doesn't continue on, and this is a really fun thing. Architectures stabilize, and stabilized architecture is recognizable as a thing unto itself. And the most classic example is the automobile. Great example of stabilized architecture, to where when the engineers first start out with it, the tinkers, the hobbyists, they're building this, arguably the first car, but this has a chiller on it, and maybe it has a brake. It's not clear exactly what it has for brakes. It's just very rude and crude, and in order to operate one of those, you had to really want to do that. That was not easy. This is not a commodity. To turn forward to just 1925, which is only like 30 years later, and guess what? With the exception of maybe getting the engine cranked over and started, you could get into that and drive it. Because the architecture stabilized. The primary collection of design elements that make up this thing, recognizable as an automobile, goes through stages, and when it gets to the point where it gels into a thing itself, it becomes a stabilized architecture, as a product or a technology. That is what a stabilized architecture is all about. And after the architecture stabilizes, the 1925 automobile, the 2005 automobile, that's a Subaru, I think. That's the best. Being up in the Pacific Northwest, Subarus are a fact of life up here that we live with. But as I say in the headline on this, with stabilized architectures, you're no longer worrying about what are the pieces that make this up. Instead, all the design effort changes to making better pieces to go into it. You can make a better automobile by making better pieces. The individual design elements evolve. Again, an important consideration. The different adopters have different requirements in different products, fads, hobbies, and adaptations. Adaptations is the key word that I pulled out of this to describe what foundation products were like. And repeating again, that cultures organize around these adaptations. I had to research what kind of adaptations people are buying. Now this all, by the way, this whole thing I'm describing to you, this is all the research that I'm doing before we designed the QX10. This is all the stuff that went into the background of gathering information of what was this machine going to look like. How was I going to make this into an appliance computer? What was it going to look like? This all came from the research. And that question of what kind of adaptations are people buying, I simply went through magazines and did tallies of what all the different product classifications and categories were. And it just popped out at me. Just looking at that, it was really, really remarkable how the nature of the tools that people were using became clear. And the real question that resolved in my head was this: what are people good at? What are computers good at? I had this insight that a tool is the basic relationship between an applied face, something that does work, and an intellect. The part that's left out of most discussions is the user, which is a key thing we'll come up to on this. But basically, in saying what are computers good at and what are people good at, the insight was that Computers are really good at symbol processing, and humans are really good at pattern recognition. An example is go to Einstein and say, Mr. Einstein, Dr. Einstein, I will give you $1 million to multiply 2 times 2 1,000,000 times. Probably couldn't do it. He'd have a psychotic break before he could finish it. Humans can't do that kind of a task. Whereas a Sinclair 99 could do it in about, what, a second and a half. It didn't take much for a computer to do that kind of simple processing. In looking at that, I saw in that a perfect user-tool relationship. That you had here something that was really good at simple processing, and you had here humans who were really bad at it. And that's what we do with all tools. Hammers are better at driving nails than human hands. Tools are extensions by which we adapt. And that's a key thing that keeps coming up for me in this. But that user-tool relationship is a key thing. And one of the main parts of a tool that's pretty obvious if you think about it, here's this face that I was talking about, the working face. This is what the tool is bringing to the table. But this is how you get to it. Every tool has a handle, and every handle is a user interface. And so the key on technologies that are going to fundamentally change you is you have to make sure they have a really good handle on them, a handle that works. And I came up with a theorem at this point in time. I won't go into the background. I don't have time really to give you some of the background on the anecdotes of where it came from. But when you're using a tool, the tool will, in the hands of a pro, this is an important thing that we're shooting for, this idea of transparency. This was an early use of transparency. And I get, this is, in my articles have been referenced quite a few times by people in social sciences who are talking about transparency in government, that sort of thing, which is related. And I make the point that the expert use of a tool, when you're using it, the handle disappears. If you're using a hammer and you're thinking about the handle that you're holding onto, you are going to hit your thumb. You're not going to drive nails straight into boards. It just doesn't work. The tool has to disappear. If you're driving a car and you're thinking about, oh, I'm doing this and I have to do that now, you aren't going to be watching the road and driving the car. You're going to be doing something else. The handle of the tool must disappear in the hands of the user. That's what ease of use is. Ease of use, it becomes easy at that point. That's the nature of ease of use. The other thing that I studied when I was doing the research for the QX was the state of the marketplace and looking at what was out there. This, by the way, the home reckoner, this was drawn by a gentleman named Claude Kagan, who was a fellow at Western Electric in New Jersey, and he used to come to the Technical Design Lab's offices all the time. And he presented this at the NCC, I think back in 1973, the first version in '69. And this was his home reckoner, he called this. And this is one of the big things that influenced me in putting together a computer system. Because it really drew in what we expect a computer to be today. It's got everything on it. The vacuum cleaner is running off of this thing. You know, a mouse is running around on a pad. You've got modems for communication, all hooked in. That was part of the state of the market. There were other states of the market. For example, if you look, I went through the magazine. These were, by the way, these are out of the September '82 issue of Byte magazine, which was the month that my articles about the QX10 and HASCI were introduced. So this is what we were introducing into and talking into. And this is what? This is a single board computer kit. This is an Apple II that's got some piece of software running on it. And MAC-C Muscle Micro Multi SB80/4, whatever the heck that is one of the things that was added in there. And here's Permento, ad running in it. But here's a typical mail order page that has all kinds of companies on it and lots of pieces that look together. It's just a confused jumble of a marketplace. This also was an Epson ad. Some of you have seen this, the HX20. What we were doing here was showing off our technology. I never expected to sell many of these. The limitations of it were very interesting. But it was such a beautiful piece of hardware that we knew it would influence people.
I still have my micro cassette from the first time I used one of those.
Wow.
I still have it. It's working my dad.
That's great. Well, anyway, I'm just in this review of the market. What's missing from this picture? I found out what I really discovered is that what was missing was the user. All these pictures, and even when you draw a tool, they never include the user. They all focus on the hardware. It's all on the hardware. I hate to say it, but the museum focuses on the hardware that was there. It forgets that without the user's intellect making something happen, nothing happens. There's got to be that intellect behind it making it do something of some use. So what was missing was the user. And now there's a user with a hammer. And that kind of gives you the Superman that I expect people to be when they have tools in their hands. It's what each of us becomes, is more than we were. And it's a beautiful thing. But the good handle was all part of it. The QX10, after we did all this research and got that the user was going to be the center of it, the QX10 was a step beyond what was available on those 8-bit machines that we were shown. The HASCI keyboard in particular, the keyboard that made this thing operate, was the key center of it because that was the handle that was being applied to the computer. But it had a complete integrated software system, arguably the first real integrated software system that was out there. There were other. Here's a little anecdote as well. There was actually one other integrated software system. I just went blank on the name of the company. Sorry about that. But they were located, they came out in the same issue of Pipe Magazine. They had an ad in there. Apparently they never delivered product. But now here's the funny one for you. They were right downstairs, one floor from where I sat. That's a coincidence that on planet Earth there's two of them and they're separated by a floor. I'll also point out that the same issue of Pipe Magazine also had a recruitment ad from the NSA in it. I'll let you make of those facts what you will. Beyond the 8-bit mindset, this is what Valdocs looked like. This is the 1983 version of it as we were getting ready for version 2. This is the integrated software system that we're putting into it. It shows a lot of the different pieces and a lot of things that went into it. I'll point out this in the integrated system. Any of you who are familiar with current technology will probably recognize that this looks an awful lot like something called Office 365. And the reason is that this idea of integrated software as a key element of what we do is so basic to all business computing that this exists yet today in numerous places and in numerous forms. It's what computers became if you're talking about the business PC. If you walk into any office in the world today and you see a PC sitting on a desk, you can pretty well bet it's either got Microsoft Word or it's got Office on it, or it's got the Google Apps version of that, the Microsoft Office Lite running on it. You will find that to be the case. That stabilized architecture, which we think of as business PC, includes that element. Has to be there. And we were one of the very first people who ever put it into the system because we knew it needed to be there. One of the questions is, what made this special? I mentioned the HASCI keyboard before, and I mentioned these views, so I'm going to spend a couple of minutes looking at that before I get rushed out of here. Because then they're going to lock the doors and turn the lights off at 4:45 or something, so I'm going to have to rush through this a little bit more than I'd like to. But in looking at the HASCI keyboard, remember the handle of it, what we're going to do now is I'll do the demonstration for you. I wish I had one here that I could show you. But I'm going to teach you all how to use all this software. It's up here. I'm going to teach you how to use it right now. It's going to take maybe 30 seconds. And that was the beauty of the QX10, is that anybody could walk up to it, sit down, and just start using it. You did not need to read manuals. And the reason was this thing called the HASCI keyboard. You take a look at this HASCI keyboard, the way I would demo it to people and show them and kind of get them into it. And the reason why the press went so nuts of this thing is you walk up and say, here's a bunch of keys up here called file controls. What would you guess they do? And people would go, well, they're going to do files. Okay, and there's a key that says store file controls. What would you guess that key does? That would put the file away. And okay, you've got retrieve file. What would that do? It'll get the file out. And say, okay, you know how to use the system. Start. Because basically, something like 80% of what you're going to do with a computer is laid out in these basic keys. Even today, what you do, it's really funny. You start looking at the things that you do with systems all the time. There are basic things that are very, very common and occur in all applications. My idea was, label them clearly so that people can see them, have them do exactly what they say, check the words against people, survey against surveying, what does this word mean to you? We did it, we brought in secretarial and managerial staff and said, what does get and put mean? And we compared all the different terminologies that we could use. This was a better solution. So this keyboard, you could get, if you wanted to get to the editor, you pressed edit. If you wanted the spreadsheet, you pressed calc. If you wanted the schedule, you pressed sched, and you could move data between them. So you could make a graph in the drawing system and insert it into your spreadsheet by pressing the insert key. Would insert it. We looked at it as a linguistic exercise, verb, noun, store file, get this, move line, delete paragraph. These things were built into a linguistic approach based on this. And so people picked it up really fast, and it really worked. Once editors, the reason the machine was influential, I think, is because once editors and people like this saw this in front of them, you can't unsee it. You can't not know that if you're going to walk over to this and sit down, you can't not know how to use it. It's just too obvious because it was sitting there the whole time. And instead of having it buried, having functions buried. One of the other problems I ran into, processor technology, wonderful people, I knew them well. But one of the first boards I ever built was the 3P plus S, which was a serial parallel card. And the problem was it had option jumpers on it, hundreds, dozens of options, and I, as a beginner and appliance operator as well, didn't have a clue how to do any of the configuration on it. It had too many features that didn't relate to each other. A better solution is to figure out what's really important. Well, now we know that things come out with defaults configured, and basically everybody uses the defaults, and you rarely have to mess with them. That approach to making simple things simple, take the things that are the most common functions, put them right where people can see them, put them where people can get to them with a button press. Oh, and by the way, one of the advantages of this early on is we wanted to use touchscreens. All the way back then, 1981, when this was being designed, we tried to use touchscreens, except the best touchscreens were like a 12 by 12 matrix, this big. You couldn't do anything finer, you couldn't do graphics on them and all that, so they weren't a practical solution. Instead, these were our touch keys. We put them right on the keyboard, these things that you now call function keys, or which were, I guess we call them function keys too, but they were privately labeled and set up. Advantages of this. One of the things that people said at one point was, well, you don't have a full GUI on Valdocs, which we didn't have a full GUI on Valdocs. But you know what? It was designed so that we could put a GUI on it. This is a picture of the current GUI off the current version of Word. If you compare them this way, notice the following. Type styles, design and layout, file controls, the file key up there. All these other pieces all relate to things that are on the keyboard. The idea that we had was it's great to have those things up at the top of the screen. That's a good idea, but let's also have them on the keyboard so that you don't necessarily have to move your fingers away from them. So we could have accommodated a GUI with this system really easily. Same thing with the ribbon that's out now. If you just take these concepts and poof it up there. In a sense, what we've created is the ribbon that Microsoft is currently using. It was all part of the same interface design. It was what I call topologically invariant. The pieces didn't change. And then there's this one, which we brought along. I have one of these up here, actually, which is this is an Epson computer, PX8, 1982, early 83 perhaps. The difference between this and any other one is that this also had a HASCI keyboard with store, retrieve, print, index, and mail of systems. The idea being transportable operator knowledge, that a user could work from one machine, from a big machine to a small machine, into a portable and take this thing with them. That was 1982 that we were there, putting that in place. It was really kind of nice. But the product failed, and most of you have probably never heard of the QX10. And I make the argument that the QX10 was a beauty queen with a fatal flaw. Jerry Cornell, who was a friend of mine in most ways, in a review article, if you take a look on Wikipedia, the Wikipedia article basically has a couple of things from Jerry and a couple of other people, which Jerry said, was fatally flawed. He thought its fatal flaw was that it was integrated software and that it was slow. He didn't like integrated software, and it was slow. Well, we were running this on a Z80 with floppies. And when because it was a full WYSIWYG editor, you had to be able to be at the beginning of a 100-page document and go anywhere in it and have everything right, all the formatting right, and all the fonts right, and the entire screen was graphics driven. Nothing was done with character modes on this. It was completely a graphic screen on the QX10. It was a pretty remarkable piece of hardware for its time. But it also meant that since if you ran the machine with floppies, if you were at the beginning of a file and had to go to the end, it would take you as long as it would take to get through the floppy, scanning the file to figure out what the things were going to look like when you got to the end of it. On floppies, it ran horrible, I have to admit it. The typical configuration was a hard drive and a RAM disk. On a hard drive and a RAM disk, it was not slow. But Jonathan Sachs at PC and Jerry used the floppy disk version and reported on that as though that were the base of it. And candidly, I think that black PR did as much to kill the company and to kill Vadox as anything else, because I needed the support of all you people. I could go into the whole marketing program. We don't have time. The marketing program for this counted on guys like you to support the product and to see its value and to help pass people on, to kind of be the priests who would be the rite of passage for getting people into the business. And Jerry Pornell goes and says, nah, you don't want to do this. Poof, none. Well, he wanted to do it, and that really hurt the product badly. The other problem that really nailed this, and the one thing that killed it more than anything else, dating back, reflecting back to that comment I did about that meeting at Zilog some years later, was that the Z80 processor could never do a GUI, and it could never do a desktop. And so we were dead-ended. We were in the technological box canyon on that processor chip. That goes back to the very beginnings of the system development. We should not have been using a Z80 processor. It was the wrong choice. Neil Coleman, who I mentioned, wanted us to go with the Intel. Roger wanted us to go with the Zilog. We went with what Roger suggested, and that wasn't right. It was the wrong choice, because it dead-ended us in that. And that probably had more to do with why the product went away than anything else. There was also, again, anecdotes for people who were there. Colonel HASCI, there was somebody who called themselves Colonel HASCI, who was constantly leaking product information from Epson to the press. And the fellow who was the marketing director of Epson who had taken over from me when I left to do Rising Star was sure that it was me who was leaking all these private plans out, and it wasn't. And to this day, I have no idea who did it. I have no idea who Colonel HASCI was. I'd like to, if somebody was, if you raise your hand, I'd like to know about it. That'd be good. Epson did some things that didn't help. Epson dismantled the distribution network that I built as a printer guy. Long story, it's too long since I got, 2 minutes left, I think, to talk at this point in time. The story is really one of what I call the baby in the bathwater. That there were a lot of good things going on with the QX10 in terms of ease of use, things we discovered that could have made a big difference to a lot of people, but it wasn't to be. What was to be and what worked on it was this theory of architectural stabilization. The idea that there were non-genetic adaptations and that the most important component in the system was the user. This is very fundamental insights into how computers evolve that people needed to be able to use as they go forward. This thing, non-genetic adaptations, I talk about NGAs, I call them. This is the most important discovery. We'll end off just with this real briefly. The most important discovery that I think I made, and I believe it to be true, was that we kind of back-ended into discovering a new theory of evolution. That evolution used to occur, or can still occur, of course, genetically, but at the point where intelligence and opposable thumb were provided by genetic evolution, at that point the creation of non-genetic adaptations has taken over the role of evolution. It isn't like evolution, it is evolution. I think that that's something that changes everything I know about it. If you take a look at this graph, the numbers on this are not meant to show anything, but it just shows, like, from the beginning of time, there were a lot of genetic mutations going on early, and as we go on forward, the genetic mutations slow down. There is no reason for us to grow a sixth finger. We don't do that. If we need a sixth finger, we make one. That's what intelligence gave us. That's what an opposable thumb gave us. And that is how evolution is actually proceeding now. So I've used this as a rubric for the last 40 years, as a measuring stick. When I'm evaluating technology, I evaluate it in terms of looking at them as non-genetic adaptations. Start looking at all the toys and tools as an adaptation to you as a creature, remembering that tools change the user. They're non-genetic adaptations, and you can evaluate technologies that are emerging that way. Specifically, if you get in, you evaluate AI, you evaluate VR, virtual reality, and augmented reality. These things can all be looked at as extensions, and you can figure out which ones are going to work and which ones are not going to be of terrible use by looking at them as an adaptation and seeing whether they're going to fly and whether they fit into the models of architectural stabilization. And this was the valuable thing that came out of this, and so I'm passing that on to you. I suggest that you do that. I'm going to be writing about this in the book that I do. There's a lot more to say. It's a big topic. But it's really important to look at, hey, we have a new way of looking at how the world is evolving. And I actually think there's an end point to it. I don't think it's a continuing sequence of numbers that just keeps repeating. I think that evolution is actually heading somewhere. And that'll be interesting. I'll be researching that, and if I get an answer, I'll be sure to let you all know. Anyway, we're closing this down. That's it. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy your technology.